We are very, very lucky to be joined by Rachel Wolffson, who is the General Manager of the One-Handed Musical Instrument Trust. Now, from Rachel's background, she studied music and education at Cardiff University and then secondary music education at the University of Wales in the Institute of Cardiff. And after teaching secondary school music for a number of years, she took an extended career break to care for her family, including her son who had a stroke when he was 2, causing right-sided hemiplegia. And Rachel now works as the General Manager at the One-Handed Musical Instrument Trust, which she's been doing since 2014. So it is with great pleasure. I'd like to also acknowledge Becky here, who put me in touch with Rachel when we shared with the community that we were thinking about doing something around creativity. And some of the postings that you'll see over the month have been directly sourced from Becky. So thank you very much. And I will take no further ado but to hand you over, Rachel, and we give you the floor.
Thank you very much. That sounded a very formal introduction for a Wednesday night meeting, but hello to everybody. Miriam's tripped over the One-Handed Musical Instrument Trust many times now. We just refer to ourselves as OMHI, partly because, although for reasons I'll explain in a minute, we do look at instruments that are capable of being played without the use of one hand or arm, but some people are not quite so easy to pigeonhole, so we don't want to exclude anybody, so we just go by the name OMHI, just like M&S do, and we all know what it stands for really, but it's easier. What I thought I'd do this evening is show you some of the instruments and the adaptations that we have at in our collection. We don't have the answers to everything, but we're very happy to work with individuals if there's things that we don't talk about and you really want to learn. Yeah, well, I'll go through it now, but yeah, any questions you got at the end, please do ask, and if I can answer them I will, and if I can't then I'll drop you an email afterwards. So let me just So our strapline is enabling music making for people with physical impairments. And the reason for that, as you I'm sure may well know, is if you think of any instrument you like, almost certainly you need 10 very dexterous fingers to play it. And so if you've got any impairment to hands or arms, or then that probably means you aren't able to get maybe even as far as the first note, but certainly very far beyond that. And that's a really big exclusion factor for many people across the world. We work with all sorts of different people, people who were born without digits or hands or arms, people who've developed things like arthritis, arthrogryposis, and of course, speaking to you this evening, people with cerebral palsy. Our main aim is to remove those barriers to music making through the creation and provision of musical instruments. And the really important thing about the instruments we try and utilise is that they have the potential for undifferentiated participation, which is a very long-winded way of saying that the instrument isn't the barrier to you playing. You might be the best musician ever, you might just like playing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. That doesn't matter, but it's the thing that stops you isn't the instrument. So that's kind of the mindset we take. We were actually founded by a man called Stephen Hetherington, who has a daughter with cerebral palsy. She went to school a few years ago. She's coming up to 30 now, I should think, and said she wanted to play something. Her dad was a musician professionally at the time, and she went to her school and said she wanted to play something, and the school said, really sorry, you can't. There's nothing you can play. She's left hemiplegic, and that was the reaction she got. And so Stephen didn't really think that this was a very good state of affairs. So he founded OMHI in 2011. The original source of our instruments was through a competition that's ongoing. And it's a way of gathering equipment that's been developed. Often, initially, it was often for people who had been born without any impairments, and then life had got in the way. So maybe they'd had a stroke or an amputation or some kind of trauma or some reason why they could no longer play what they had started playing. And they needed, maybe for their career, maybe for their psychological well-being, to find a solution to get them back into playing post their whatever it was. As time's gone on, the competitions encouraged people just to develop something for anybody, or to have a challenge that a particular instrument wants, hasn't got a way of playing it. So it's broadened out, but that's where we started by getting our instruments. So I'm going to talk you through different groups of instruments and show you a range of solutions towards each one. Some will be relevant to some people in this group. Some of them, you know, different solutions will suit different people. So going to start with the saxophone. The picture on the left, I hope you can see it, is of a man playing the saxophone. That man is David Knabb, and he was absolutely case in point, somebody who was a professional saxophonist and had a stroke in his 30s, a very catastrophic stroke. And his saxophone was developed through lots of hard work with him and an American maker. And it's called the toggle key saxophone. You can see, hopefully, his right hand is holding a sort of a black tube, and that he's got enough use in his right hand, sorry, his left hand. I'm not very good with left and right. It's not good in this job, is it? He's got enough use of his left hand to be able to support the instrument, just to steady it. He hasn't got enough function to be able to control the keys that you would ordinarily use, but he has got enough to steady it. If he didn't have, and there are other people using the same instrument who don't, you can also put it on a floor stand. But then you can see on his right hand, he's playing the keys, and that's all the keys have been rearranged around his right hand. In the middle, we've got another saxophone. In fact, the other two saxophones, we've got a tenor saxophone and a soprano saxophone that were made for a man who had cancer and had to have his arm amputated. And those, you can see the middle one is on a support stand, so that it completely takes the weight and he can just walk up to it and play it. And again, that both of those have got mechanisms for him to play with his right hand in his case, I think. So just to kind of show you an idea of how far you could take these instruments, back to my undifferentiated participation statement. David is a professor of music in the States, and this is him playing a few years ago. So you can get an idea of how far you could take it if you were minded to do so. So in that brief glimpse, hopefully you could see his right hand was working very hard, but he was getting around the full range of the saxophone. He's actually done a very interesting TED talk. So if you fancy looking that up after, his name's David Knabb with a double B at the end. And he's written presented quite an interesting TED talk on accessibility in music making. So that's a whistle-stop tour through saxophones. Then we move on to flutes. And I'm hoping at the end, Becky might do us a little rendition of something festive, because I have nothing festive in my presentation. Instead, it was a festive reason to do creativity. So the picture on the left again is a one-handed flute. That is what Becky has use of at the moment. The picture in the middle is the same flute. It can be put onto a floor stand, but it can also be put onto a shoulder support. This was made by a Swiss maker who was interested in marching bands. So this allows the player to move around, stand up, whatever they want to do, and it just clicks into the flute. And then the third picture is a standard flute, so you would need to operate that with 2 hands, but you can see hopefully that the mouthpiece is a very unusual shape for a flute. This lady actually has arthritis in her shoulder, and she can't hold the flute up. It's quite a strange position really when you're playing the flute. It's quite an unusual position. There's nothing else that we sort of do with this very long holding up of anything to the side. So this head joint fits on a standard flute, but it brings the instrument down more to a clarinet playing position, so it's a bit more comfortable for her to play. Now, I'm not going to undersell Becky's playing in a minute, but the flute was made about 8 years ago, I think, for a lady who'd had she was hit on the head in the street by some drunken yob one night, and she was again one of the people that went to look at a solution for herself to play the flute, or to get back into playing the flute. The flute was made in Holland, and this is a little clip of her playing the Carnival of Venice. Again, you can see that lady's called Edith van der Berg. You can see there that she's got enough use of her right hand to be able to support the flute, but again, not operate the keys. But you can also put that flute on a flute stand. Now moving on to clarinet. This is one of the first instruments that was developed because we had a competition and someone could, rather than because an individual needed it. Peter, shown in the picture on the right, is the maker. And he's an absolute genius. He's based in Norfolk, and we were repeatedly asked, well, you've got a flute, why not a clarinet? Lots of people want to play the clarinet. And I rang Peter up one day and I said, why can't I have a clarinet? And he said, oh, because I don't play the clarinet, I play the cello. Oh no, there's 19 keys to manage with one hand. Sorry, with 2 hands. You know, to manage 19 keys with one hand, it's just not going to be possible. And then about 8 months later, he produced me this clarinet, and it's amazing and beautiful. And we have many of them in schools with children who otherwise just wouldn't be able to access the clarinet. Having said it's amazing and beautiful, it really is, but when you hand make any instrument, the cost is expensive, and it's not worth making a beginner instrument that you're going to grow out of by the time you get to grade 1. You know, you want something that when you're going to invest the time into making it a one-handed instrument or an adapted instrument, you want to be able to get it to make it last for a long time. So while this is a wonderful instrument, it is also £6,000. However, this year, one of my projects I've managed to get funding for is to make a 3D printed version of it. So Peter, again, 2 years ago, told me it wasn't going to be possible to 3D print it. And bless him, he's now bought a 3D printer and he's training his wife how to use it. So he's really going for it. We were up in Manchester. In fact, the day I took the flute to Becky, we were up in Manchester looking at their 3D printing lab at the university. So it isn't quite there yet. We've got a reason to need it on the 21st of December, and I've been promised that I will have it on the 21st of December. So we might have it then. Now, I'm not going to promise that this clarinet is going to be £300 like a standard clarinet would be, because there's still an awful lot of hand making, finishing and that sort of thing. But if we can get it that it's cheaper than £6,000, we then start building up a progression route for somebody to have a starter instrument and move on to the fancy version if they get that far and if they can find enough money to pay for it. but that's the clarinet. And on the left hand side you can see that's the connection to the stand. So that's a repurposed camera connection from a tripod, so that you can have that on a stand, or as Peter's wearing it, you can have it on a support where it's got a block of wood against his belly and then a sprung metal piece attaching it to the clarinet. And you can also use that attachment with any clarinet. It just a clarinet is divides into 3 sections, and between the last 2 sections there's a small ring that you can just fit between the 2 joints of any clarinet, and then that will attach to the support. So it doesn't completely take away the weight bearing, but it just stabilizes it, and it gives it some support through your abdomen rather than everything through your hands. Bagpipes, everybody loves the bagpipes. We had a boy come to us, or his parents came to us and said he really wanted to play the bagpipes, and so we set a man called Duncan Mingy's a challenge to make his electronic chanter one-handed. So Duncan had been from Stirling, moved to London to go and do a PhD, and discovered his neighbours didn't particularly like him practicing his bagpipes. And so he took a standard bagpipe chanter and put some electronics inside the chanter, so that he could plug his headphones in and practice silently. And he also developed an app type thing so that he could learn all the different ornaments that you use in bagpipes. Apparently there's like 60 something ornaments bagpipe players use. Who knew? Anyway, he did reprogram his bagpipe chanter so that you can play the bagpipes, and we do have several people across the world, actually. I think our bagpipes have gone the furthest of any instrument, playing the bagpipes. This is a little interview with the child who originally contacted us. He appeared on BBC Breakfast after he got his bagpipes.
For Guy, this is a dream come true. He's learnt to play the scales, and let's be honest, he looks the part too. But getting this far hasn't been easy. Guy was born with no left hand.
I've got a bone missing in it, and I've got 5 fingers, but some are really small, and I've always felt special with it.
Not many people your age want to learn to play the bagpipes. What made you so interested in that instrument?
My mum's Scottish, so when we go up there, we see my Uncle Neil, and he plays the bagpipes, so I've seen them before.
Ready? Guy's mum reached out to the One-Handed Musical Instrument Trust. They found Duncan, a music teacher, who invented this. It's called the P-Brock, a digital chanter that's changed Guy's life.
There you go. Cute boy. Right, guitars, back into the realms of more normal. Guitars, we have 2 main solutions that we use. The one on the left of this slide is called a Chapman stick. And the man standing in the photo is Emmett Chapman, who sadly died this year, or the end of last year, I think. This is not an instrument that was developed particularly for one-handed use, but it can be played one-handed. So if you imagine a guitar, take away the body and plug an amplifier in, so like an electric guitar without a body at all, but because there's no body, you can reach it from both sides. So traditionally, this was invented in the 70s, so most Chapman stick players would reach from both sides and play from both sides of the fingerboard. But the way that the sound is created is by the note that you would not, the finger that you would normally use to choose the note, it initiates the sound. So there's no plucking or strumming or whatever at the same time. And so it can be used just with one hand. The instrument can have, it's a different tuning to a standard guitar. There are various different models of them. But they can have the full range from a bass guitar to a standard guitar as well. So you've got a really good range of music that you can play. And then on the right hand side of this slide is a digital version that works pretty much in the same, or at least can work in pretty much the same way. This is called an Instrument One, very creative title, and it's made by Artifon, again in the States. the strings that you can see aren't really there. They're just a shape on the fingerboard. And you again you can use this tap method, they call it, on the Artiphon, where your finger hand is selecting the note and you don't need to worry about anything else to play. We use these a lot in schools, and I also work with Headway. I don't know if any of you have had anything to do with Headway. I work with Headway in locally in Birmingham, with a group of adults. And a Monday morning we have a group each week at the moment. That because it's a digital instrument, you can change the sound, so you can have it as a guitar. In schools where we've got children learning whole class instruments, I don't know how many of you have been in contact with primary schools recently. Probably for the last 10 years or so, there's been a trend towards teaching the whole of a year 4 classes, often year 4, the trumpet, the violin, whatever. And this is an instrument that you could use instead of a guitar or a ukulele or a violin or a cello very easily. But actually it can make any sound. So on a Monday morning, we usually have them doing percussion with We Will Rock You and things like that, because you can set the frets to be drum sounds or pretty much any sound. I had a child a few weeks ago in a recorder group. It was a weekend conference for children with limb differences, and he'd actually got no arms at all. And I said to him, well, how do you write? That's my standard question when I come across people with no arms. And he said, with my right feet out. And he had this on the floor and he was playing it with his feet. We set it to a woodwind sound, so it blended with the recorders. And apart from the 2 minutes of the session where the teacher was explaining how to tongue a recorder, everything else in the session he was just joining in, which was brilliant. So they're very versatile. You can place them wherever you like, so they can be held like a guitar. You can place them on the table in front of you. You can place them to one side or the other side, and they're just very, very versatile like that. They connect up to an Apple device. So it has to be iPod, iPad, iPhone. But other than that, they're really quite useful instruments. But obviously, I put them on a guitar slide because they look like a guitar, but they are really quite versatile. Just to give you an idea then of the Chapman stick, this is a very non-guitar-y style place, but I'm a cellist, so we're going to have a piece of cello music on a Chapman stick. But it's a good video for showing it being played with one hand, just so you can see how far you can get with it. Okay, now a few minutes ago I mentioned recorders. I don't know how many of you when you were at school got presented with a recorder to play. My parents actually met through recorder playing, so I wouldn't be here without them, but that's another story. So this slide's got 3 different versions of a recorder. The first two, the left and the left-hand side and the central slide, are descant recorders, so the type of recorder you'd have probably seen in schools. But you can see on those recorders, they've got lots of extra keywork. Basically, the way they work is normally you would put your left hand on the top half of a recorder and your right hand on the bottom half, and you would use a combination of fingers to get the notes. On this recorder, whichever hand you use, you're just going to place your hand on the bottom half of the instrument. If you use your left hand, it would just be a mirrored version of the right-handed instrument. And there are 4 holes on the bottom half of the instrument, same as every recorder ever. But those gold bars you can see, and they really are gold, operate keys. That means that you can then play the top half of the recorder, so what would normally be your left hand. So it gives you full range of the recorder. Like I was just describing with the clarinet, we have worked on producing a 3D printed version of this, and there is a plastic version as well, just standard plastic recorder as the base. We also have another 3D printed version more recently, but but the principle's there so that you've got that starter instrument and then you've got somewhere to progress if you get really good at the recorder. The photo on the right hand side is a bass recorder, again with Peter Worrell, my style maker from Norfolk, and he's done all the other recorders in between. There are lots of different size recorders, and they've all got one-handed finger patterns, and they're all a variation on that same theme. A year or so ago, OMHI celebrated our 10th anniversary, and we had an awards event in Birmingham, and we were really privileged to have a young lad who was born with cerebral palsy come and play his recorder to us. I can claim nothing more about this. I have had no intervention in his musical journey, but we were really pleased to see what he's been able to do with the recorder. And I think at this point he'd just done his grade 8 on the recorder, so it can be done. Here's a little clip of him playing. It was a very nervous performance. I slightly dropped him on it and realised he was going first, so forgive the slightly rocky performance and enjoy it anyway. Now, the next device I'm going to play you, I'm going to let you imagine what you're hearing and then reveal it. So are you ready for this? There you go. So that's called an instrument. The man in the photo here is Roger Lynn, who created it. He is well known for the last 40 years or so for developing various electronic instruments. As you can see in the photo, the instrument's connected to a computer and some music software. It's very, very versatile, which in some ways makes it quite complicated to operate, but it does have potential if you can get it set up and you know, set up as you need it to offer you a lot of different sounds. And it is very responsive in all the kind of expressive music way that you want. It's not just an on-off switch. You know, you hit the block and it makes the sound. You can control the sound by how hard you hit it. You can make vibrato and all these different expressive effects with it. So it has a lot of possibilities. It opens up a lot of possibilities to you. You can see the kind of coloured dots in the photo. So they would be some of the notes, but even the squares that don't have lights in those in that photo are also sounds. It's just an indication of where you are. So yeah, there we go. That's an instrument. So most of those instruments, the first sections we've had woodwind, and they are probably the most effective adapted instruments. They're also, because of their complexity, probably the most expensive set of instruments. But now we're going to move on to some brass instruments. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever had a go at brass instruments. The majority of the work to play a brass instrument is done by one hand, and the other hand is mostly supporting the weight of the instrument. There are some, higher level technical things that you do with the other hand, but as a kind of starter point, if you can take the weight of the instrument, then you're a good way towards playing it. So you'll see in these pictures, there are three very similar looking stands. We've got a trumpet and a trombone in the middle. And then on the right hand side is a slightly different stand, but similar principles. And this is a French horn stand, and it's Felix Kleeser. Now, Felix was born without his arms. I don't know if any of you have heard him. If you ever listen to classic FM, it's quite often, oh, that was blah, 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 horn concerto played by Felix. One of the things that's really important, or we don't always succeed, but we really try and focus on, is making sure that the individual user is able to set up their equipment for themselves, because there's no point in me setting up something that you need somebody else with you to build every time you play. So this is just an example of Felix building his French horn stand. Don't worry about the German commentary on this. I'm not playing it for that, just so that you can see him, how he's able to build his stand.
Ich glaube, wenn man so eine CD macht und vor allem auch so eine erste CD, dann habe ich mir die Gedanken gemacht, wie möchte ich mich eigentlich präsentieren? Und wir waren uns eigentlich relativ schnell einig, dass wir irgendwie das Charakteristische von dieser Kombination herausarbeiten wollen. Und das ist eigentlich die romantische Musik.
Wir kennen uns schon eine ganze Reihe von Jahren. Felix war damals Schüler von Professor Schröder in Hannover. Und ich habe dort mit den Studenten als Korrepetitor gearbeitet und in diesem Zusammenhang haben wir uns kennengelernt.
Auf der einen Seite hat man französische Romantik, auf der anderen Seite hat man russische, dann wieder deutsche. Die Zeit ist ungefähr dieselbe, also wo diese Stücke entstanden, aber die Kulturen und der Hintergrund ist halt immer jeweils ein anderer.
There you go. So next time you hear him on Classic FM, you'll know he's playing an adapted horn. Strings are our weakest set of instruments, I would say, for those of you who are the next budding violinist. But for some people, we're able to do some things about the position of the instrument, and sometimes that's helpful. It doesn't help everybody, but it does help some people. So always the most important thing, as far as we're concerned, is that you're able to play to make the sound on the instrument, and that we're not doing any further harm to your body by putting it in such an awkward position that we're then straining a back or straining something else that you've got that's working really well. So this is just an example of an ensemble that I had in the States a few years ago at a music camp. We've got two girls on the left hand side who were born without their arms and who play with their feet, and they are just standard cellos but propped up in such a way that they can reach them with their feet comfortably, and they can get around the cello as they need. then the two, me and the other teacher in the middle, ignore us. And then the next young lady round with the blue t-shirt, she's got a condition called arthrogryposis. So again, by bringing the cello up to a sort of coffee table height, she's able to get around the cello more comfortably. And then on the right hand side is a young man with quite a lot of congenital limb difference. So he's playing the cello with his left hand using the bow, so the opposite way to that which would be standard, and then he's using a particular technique for his right hand that allows him to reach around the cello. I've got a little video of the girl most to the left playing in the end of camp concert, just again so you can see what is possible when you might not think it's possible. Put this in some context, I've played the cello for over 40 years now, and I had a go at her cello while I was over there, and my feet don't work like her feet, so it's the fact that she's using her feet all the time does make a difference, but it just shows what's possible. Don't let anybody tell you it's not. There you go. So that's a whistle stop through some of the instruments we use, and just to give you kind of an idea of how we use them. We have various programs. So the OMHI Music Makers program is something where we offer individual students the opportunity to learn an adapted instrument. That started in Birmingham in 2015, then it spread to Surrey the next year, and now we've got children all over England and Wales learning through that. It's a great way of supporting individual children, but also getting the teachers to be aware of equipment that's out there, so that the next time a child comes their way, they actually can suggest a way forward rather than just saying, well, no, you can't play. The I Am programme is our work where we're working with 3 music hubs at the moment to support children who are in these primary school classes I was saying about earlier, where they're all learning the same instrument for a term or a year or whatever it is. It's different in the different areas. And with that programme, we actually go out before the lessons are due to start in the September, and we say to the schools, tell us about the children in your school to learn this instrument. You know, you're going to need good breath control, good motor dexterity in both hands, or whatever it is for the particular instrument they're going to learn. Tell us about children who might have barriers to that, in the hope that week 1 the child is not in school with an instrument they can't get anywhere near, but they can actually start from the beginning. Hopefully the teachers have also had an opportunity to look at the instrument and get an idea of how it works and how they can incorporate it with the other children learning standard instruments. The next one is the OMHI scheme. This is possibly most of relevance to anybody on this call who would like to try an instrument. It's for how Becky's got one of our flutes. So this is a scheme where we offer our instruments for hire for a year. We try and keep the costs of this down to as low as we can, but it gives people a chance to try things for themselves. Some people have them on a longer term basis than a year. But we hope that a year gives you at least a chance to say, yes, this is for me. No, this is not working for me, before you go anywhere near trying to fundraise and you know, get one of your own. The OMHI research programme is some academic research that we do into instrument development, particularly around electronic instruments, and also the sort of education side of music participation as well. And then we do lots as much as we can about raising awareness of instruments and the existence of people with conditions that might prevent them from playing standard instruments, because that seems to be an amazingly necessary thing in many circles. So we often do sessions like we're doing tonight with you, but also with occupational therapists, physiotherapists, music teachers, whoever would like to know or needs to know more about how to include everybody that they come across who'd like to be involved in music making. So just before I finish and we take some questions, I'm going to play you one last video. I've played you lots of very high-end things because that's often the bit that people can't quite imagine where, you know, that you can play at that level with some adapted equipment. This is a child who'd been learning with us for about 9 months, and it's just a cute video. See, you've all got a smile on your face now. There are about 100 people in that room as well, bless him. Right, there you go. That's me, finished.
Thank you so very much, Rachel. That was absolutely brilliant. Actually making me feel quite emotional. I wish I was that last child in my recorder lessons. So does anybody have any questions for Rachel?
Yeah.
Miriam's gonna kick us off, I think.
I'm gonna kick you off. So I'm really intrigued about having gone through teaching, you know, my children learning, etc. And then we had to go to the local councils to hire the musical instruments. So and that was a little while ago because my kids are, you know, past that stage now. But it is, you talked about going to schools when there was the whole year learning, but you know, those hubs of hiring, do they know about you as well?
We do our best to tell them. We've done lots of work over the years with different hubs. We often have individuals who come to us, and then because they've come to us, then we can tell their hub that we're here for the rest of the children who haven't had such quite proactive parents or whatever it is that you know have reached us. So we do have instruments hired by schools up and down the country, really. So you know, lots of people do know about us, but there is plenty of scope for more to find out and to be told, and probably, you know, you work with a hub and you get things going with them, and they've got a child or two that you supply some instrument for, and then the head of the hub leaves or somebody leaves and you start again. So you know, we do our best to communicate with them. There are, in England alone, there are 118 hubs, so there are an awful lot of people that you know are operating these music services, and it's difficult to get to know them all. We do some work with national organisations, like sort of umbrella organisations that work with the hubs, but yes, there's always scope for more awareness. And it's amazing that the frustrating things I'm sure some of you will identify with, the frustrating thing for us is when you go to a hub, and we describe the kind of work we do, and they sort of say, oh, well, we don't have any children like that here. Or you start talking to them and their instant response is, well, yes, we do this in the special school. Well, fine, 10% of the people are in the special school, but that means 90% are not in the special school. And what are you doing for those children? And it's often those children who are missed even more. So just that, what I was saying about people just being aware of the children's existence is a ridiculously big part of our work, really, and scarily necessary. And I don't really know why, because it's not like anything's changed in the last 100 years.
It's amazing. I think it's almost like it's such a lack of equity when it's like we've talked about PE, and it's time to stop holding the stop clock or the whistle, or for people with different access needs to sport. But from a music point of view, it's just so, it's such an uplifting thing to know you can create music. And if, like you said, your barrier is the instrument, well, that's not a good enough reason not to be able to have a go.
No. And unfortunately, like many things with sports and arts, sport with the Paralympics and so on has had about a 75-year lead time on the development of equipment that allows access. And still probably a lot of that equipment isn't available in schools, but at least people know about it, and there's a sort of role model, and there's an expectation that, well, like you say, that maybe the child shouldn't be holding the whistle, or whatever. In music, we are so far behind the awareness, the development of the equipment, the availability of the equipment, the cost of the equipment, all of those other things. We had a conference in 2018 in Birmingham. We had people from 5 continents across the world coming to that conference, and we did not find, and have never found, any other organisation that's looking at standard instruments. So there are some organisations looking at digital instruments and new electronics, which is great, and lots of exciting things going on there. But the general the child that goes into school and sees their friend playing the flute, the violin, the guitar, that's what they know that they want to play or don't, and it's knowing how they can access those bits of equipment as well. And we are a tiny organisation. I mean, there are literally 3 members of staff. I'm full-time, the other 2 are half-time, and that's us. We've got very active trustees, and it's all good, but we are really tiny to be facing this problem and being the only organisation trying to address what's going on.
Amazing, thank you.
Jean, you had your hands up next. I think I'm just going to add you a spotlight on.
In the interests of openness, I'm the mother of a violin teacher who has your organisation, because you've been to Derby and Derbyshire Music Hub, and she was there when you were talking to them. So when I told her about tonight, she said, do go and listen, Mum. I sing, and I also play the violin a bit, but I find my biggest problem is sitting properly, so that when I want to lift my arms up to hold the violin, I normally end up going sideways. And it's that getting myself into the right position as an older person so that I can go back to playing my violin, which is under the table here.
Well, singing's all very good, and in the whatever you just said, in the realms of openness, my son, who had a stroke when he was 2, when he got to the age of school and said what could he play, he ended up being a singer. But he wasn't a thing then, in my world at least. So yeah, singing's great. Yes, I don't have any magic answers for posture. I don't know. I do know people who've had kind of therapeutic back support. I don't know whether something like that you could perhaps wear just to help you keep that strength up in your back without having to do it yourself. I don't know.
it's keeping that strength. So because otherwise I'm putting so much pressure on, mum gets tired too quickly from holding it out for fingering or anything else. Looking at Miriam there, maybe she's got some bright ideas.
I was just thinking, sorry to jump in. So I'm a physio, Rachel.
Okay.
So I'm neurophysio. So there are two things that I was thinking. One was whether there's a stand for the violin, like you have for some of the other wind instruments.
There isn't, which is not to say there couldn't be, but there isn't, mainly because the stand, if you support the violin, you've still got to operate the fingers, whereas if you support the trumpet, you can ignore the hand that would otherwise be holding the trumpet. So that's why we probably have never developed one. But as I said at the beginning, if we haven't got something and somebody wants something, well, let's try and make
because
something.
You know the shoulder support that you had with the flute. I'm wondering whether something along those lines would work with a violin, Jean. It was just one thought.
Yeah, possibly. It might just add too much weight. It's not.
It's the the biomechanics of it all, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think thinking about the biomechanics of it, it's sort of trying to get my hips and feet in a good position on the floor, so that the lower half is stable to hold the upper half, and that seems to be the problem. And also, there's lots of new rests around, and really it's a question of talking to someone who's used to seeing. I guess my daughter as a violin teacher can do it, but it's finding time for her. She's got a busy life, she's got a family.
I think the other two things that I was thinking, and especially when I was seeing the flute pictures, that actually echoes it, Jean, is one, you may need to create a special chair which you have like a step at the bottom to support your feet properly, and like cushions that you have positioned so you almost wedge yourself into that space to splint your lower half. And also I was thinking that for some people it may be that you actually have to work on building up certain shoulder muscles to be able to have enough stamina in these muscles to sustain, so that your muscle fatigue doesn't go down into your spine. It's like you have to go into training to play your instrument in a
that makes a lot of logical sense. That does make a lot of logical sense.
But equally, yes, you might have to go into training initially, but I've certainly found with starting with the flute, the more you do it, obviously the more muscle memory you end up developing as you start to develop and learn certain things. Then if you can keep it up, you will kind of keep up that muscle ability.
But the idea of wedging both sides is a good one. That is one I'll probably have a go at trying. I've got an armchair that I'm sitting in at the moment that can be sort of cushioned and wedged and played around with.
Miriam, do you know what, as a physio, do you know what I mean by the kind of back supports?
Yes,
that kind of you strap around. I don't know if that would be worth trying as well.
I think it would be an interesting exploration. I think that the thing about it is, though, is if you're thinking about it, some sort of a corset would hold your body. A little bit like, the old corsets that people used to wear with the whaleboats. However, what I'm thinking more is that when you're playing an instrument, there is a small amount of body movement that goes on as you feel the music, etc. So I think I'm thinking of an external. Put my hands down. You can't see where my hands are going.
We know what you mean.
I'm thinking of an external stabilizer here, so that you can still do all of that little bit of movement when you're playing, but you can't go very far because it's blocked by the arms of the chair. If that makes sense. Which is also a lot cheaper than buying a corset and trying it out.
Have you ever tried the cello? Because that obviously does have the weight through the floor.
I've got the cerebral palsy, form of cerebral palsy I've got is has got an atypical dystonia, and my legs don't behave in a normal CP fashion. Do they, Miriam? So
no one. There's no uniform way. People are
so
all unique.
In fact, I mean, I was 11 and they presented me with this violin and said, "Here you are, try that." I did say to my daughter a couple of years ago, should I have looked at the cello? And she said, "Mum, I don't think you'd have got the right position for it." Because she teaches all the upper strings plus cello plus anything else that, and she supports all these children learning clarinet, because clarinet was her second instrument.
Okay.
And have you ever put anything in for the school's prom?
No, because the way we've worked is that we make the instruments available, and so if the music service had put something in for the school's prom, it might be that some of our equipment's been used, but we wouldn't have organised it ourselves. I think that's another thing, that you get organisations where they're trying to pull everybody together, but actually when you live in wherever you live, Derbyshire or wherever, you want to go to the local orchestra with your friends down the road, not to some remote place.
The Derbyshire bands and the orchestras locally have been to the school's prom in London.
Well, maybe they've taken some of our equipment and I don't know. It's ever possible.
It's just that I remember seeing adverts there and just thinking that if they allowed advertising, you could put it in the programme or something like that. So
that's a good idea.
There's so many more people wanting to talk.
Thanks, Jean. I'm going to go to find Dean next because he's had his hand up. One moment, Jean. Oh, I didn't mean to do that, but you can go with your question and I'm going to... There we go.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, we got the... There we go. Yeah, it's not so much a question, it's more of an observation, really, Rachel. You know, while I was watching you speak and with the slides, etc., and the videos, you know, it just occurred to me that seeing people, you know, if there wasn't the help available and support available that OMHI does, then people wouldn't be able to play. And I mean, play an instrument. I went to I attended a secondary school in Rochdale, which is very kind of big on brass. And when I joined in 1983. It was the whole kind of integration thing, and which was quite new to begin with, and just holding us interacting with, you know, kind of holding a brass instrument of any kind. Forget that, you know, because it just wasn't, you know. But I've been in touch with the school over the last, you know, over the years, been back in touch and has to go back on various reunions, and now what I'm finding is that pupils who attend the school now with physical difficulties, all sorts of physical difficulties, are now actually integrated within the bands. And I don't know how. I know they may have some. I mean, likewise with PE, although it's different with PE because obviously they don't play with the main, well, with the, you know, non-disabled, but there are ways of adapting. What I'm trying to say is there are ways of adapting. So in music, I don't know how it's done. Well, you know, in you know, at my old school, I don't know how they did it, but they obviously did to make it possible. And it's you know, so well, I think it's very good. You know, I'd never heard of your organisation before, so. And
I'm not surprised.
It's amazing, you know, and you know, I'll you know, if I know anybody who needs any, you know, has any access requirements, and they feel like to, and that thing as well as when I was watching the videos, like you wouldn't imagine that there would, that you would think you were playing an instrument, and they're not. It's just like a piece of plastic with various, you know, with very. No, I just think it was amazing. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm glad to hear things are improving in your school. That's really good news. I think that's one of the things with music, the way we're working towards it is that that full inclusion is there. There's no Paralympics and Olympics. It's just the sport, or the equivalent. And that's really important. No one wants to be isolated from their friends. So
thanks so much, Dean.
Can I ask you another question, Rachel? And I'm hoping I know the answer to this, but I just thought I would ask. So you've got some kids at primary school who have luckily enough heard of OMHI, and luckily enough have had some adaptive instruments appropriate so that they can progress and explore the world of music. And then they want to take some exams.
Yep.
How are the different boards, how do they receive all of that? Because some of them are quite, in the polite way, stuffy, and they're very conservative, and if you don't do things in a certain way, they have a problem with it. So
because instruments, the aim is that they can do the same as a standard instrument, just in a different way. Quite a lot of the time the children get entered for exams, they do the exams, and the exam boards haven't even registered that something different has happened. We've had people get up to grade 4 to date, I think, and obviously the lad playing the recorder, he had actually done grade 8. I don't know whether he'd notified them or not, but again, back to my point earlier about it's about the music, it's about the sound and the expression and the performance. It's not about how you get the notes out. I think it's fair to say, and Becky might have something to say on this, some of the notes are easier and some of the notes are harder than a standard instrument. So that possibly does affect the ease to which someone might approach exam repertoire. But in terms of the actual performance for anything that sort of is vaguely a standard instrument, like a one-handed flute, one-handed clarinet, people have done exams and it's not been a problem. One of the exam boards has an access coordinator who is himself completely blind. So that's quite helpful. Although it's not a physical impairment, he does have good understanding of access needs and is willing to do what they can to make it possible for people to do exams, and is very encouraging of that. So yes, no problems to date. Where we there's a couple of areas where we still have some work to do. One is on the use of digital instruments. So the one that said Turkish oud at the beginning, at the moment, I don't know how you would examine that. There are one of the exam boards has got something called the Sounds of Intent framework, where it's more about the musical, it's just assessed in a different way. So that's possibly a way in which that instrument could be used, but that's only one of the exam boards. The other area where we are working with the exam board, or one of the exam boards at the moment, is about piano. So obviously with the piano, there's a limit to what you can do to the instrument to change it to be one-handed, or adapt repertoire for upper limb impairment. But there is a lot of very virtuosic material. There's just no trajectory to get you there. So what we've been trying to bring on board, and we're getting there slowly, is we sent out a survey to teachers who've worked with a range of students who've only got use of one hand, and to find out what material they're using. And since COVID, there are some exams now that you can do where they're online, and because they're online, the examiners in the traditional exams would have asked for a set of scales from a big list. They can't do that. So they've dropped the scales for these online exams, and they've introduced a 4th piece instead. So that scales are a thing that I haven't got an answer. How do you make the scales of the same difficulty if you're just doing one hand as opposed to 2? That's where you start getting adrift with your exam requirements and the difficulty of what's possible. But with these exams where you can do 4 pieces, what we're working towards is having a list of pieces as part of that syllabus that only use one hand. And I'm also pushing myself that those pieces can be played by anybody. You don't, because there are all these discussions about, like, basically how disabled do you have to be able to play these pieces, and it's like, no, anybody can play the Ravel concerto for left hand, and most people who play it have full use of both hands. So it just needs to be that piece is, whoever uses it, whoever plays it, can only use one hand to play it. And then the difficulty factor is there equally for everybody. And obviously, if you've got children, as we do work with, where you've got perhaps a couple of digits on each hand or something else, then the access requirements can then come in for those children on an individual basis, to make sure that the difficulty factor is appropriate. But yes, we on the whole, if they've got standard, the one-handed flute, one-handed recorder, one-handed clarinet, we've had a trombone stand, we've had all of those used in exams, and I don't think the exam boards have known about it until I've told them afterwards. So yeah,
it's fantastic. It's fantastic. So congratulations.
Thank you. I feel like we need a bit of a rendition from Becky, having asked her to do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just going to find, I've done something strange to my computer. I apologise. I'm just going to try and get Becky back. Oh, there we go. I fixed it. Let me find Becky, and then I can spotlight her for you. There we go. I'm going to take everybody else away. And your floor is soon to be yours, Becky.
Floor is soon to be mine. I might have to remove my background so you can actually see the
Oh
whole
yeah,
thing.
let's have a full.
There we go.
Oh.
Can you hear me? Yeah, good. So a bit like some Emma and some of the others were saying, my journey in music has taken me a very long time, basically. So I started off in primary school going, oh, I'm quite interested in this music thing. I'd quite like to have a go. And so there was a lady down the road who taught music. And so she taught me a bit of piano and a bit of music theory. And when I was at school, I had a teacher who was relatively forward thinking. And, oh, well, we've got a recorder group. I'll see what there is for one-handed. Oh, you can buy a one-handed recorder. Oh, it's £3,000. This was in '92. Maybe not. Oh, well, never mind. We'll give you the xylophone and you can play the xylophone, which kept me entertained for a while and led to me joining the local youth orchestra and doing some percussion, which again was all right. But as Rachel's just said, with both percussion and piano, you can only get so far with one hand, and then you sort of stop being able to progress because you can't do rolls on a drum, you can't do scales, you can't do this, that, and the other. I think with hindsight now, I'd have probably been quite happy just to carry on with the music theory. But everybody else, I think, was thinking in terms of a sort of general able-bodied child, and was like, oh no, she doesn't want to do that. That'll be terribly boring. Just doing music theory. So everything sort of stopped. And then for years I kept seeing bits and pieces of things, and then I saw the Para Orchestra at London 2012. And I thought, oh, so something can be done. I really should, do whatever. And life got in the way, and I had a job and whatever. And then during lockdown, I was watching Young Musician of the Year, which I do every year, and I thought, this is ridiculous. There must be more stuff now than there was. So I just Googled one-handed instruments, and I happened to come across OMHI and found out a bit more about it. And when I was quite young, there was a music teacher who was just happened to be a member of the congregation at my church, and she gave me a little like thin set of pan pipes. They were really tiny, and they'd been made handmade by someone when she'd been on holiday somewhere, and she realized that I actually had the ability to blow in the right kind of way to play woodwind, and was sort of like, she really should play woodwind. And then someone went, yes, she can only use one hand, and it was like, that was the end of the kind of discussion. Everybody went quiet about it because they suddenly realized this wasn't the thing to say. And And so I went to and had a discussion with Rachel, and she was like, well, what do you really want to play? And I was like, well, probably flute, or something woodwindy, probably flute. The other thing I'd had a foray into at one point was brass. But I have real trouble, the way my CP affects me, one side of my mouth muscles are weaker than the other. So I had real trouble blowing raspberries, which is what you need to be able to do, which resulted in, for those of you who know the northwest of England, there's a very big music shop in Manchester called Forsyth. And it's 4 floors. It's like a department store full of musical instruments. And once one poor gentleman in there spent about 2 hours with me. He was determined he was going to get me to make a noise on this cornet. He failed. But he was dead determined that, oh, somebody will be able to teach her, she'll be able to do it. And it just didn't happen. So it's been quite a long and overarching and quite frustrating. And then Rachel said, well, we'll see what we can do. And then the opportunity came up to hire my flute, which I started in May. So we're only six months in. And it's been going really well. My flute teacher is just a standard flute teacher. She teaches flute generally to various people. Had never seen one of these before, but within sort of 1 session or 2 sessions, she'd pretty much worked it out and knew how it worked. She occasionally has to look at my fingering chart because she forgets what I do that's slightly different. But yeah, and like Rachel says, pretty much I'm now working towards doing my grade 1 pieces and doing my grade 1 exam, hopefully at some point. So yeah, so I do have a little Christmas piece for you if you want to hear. I'll just get the music in the right place. Hang on a minute.
That was fantastic, Becky.
6 months in. Brilliant.
Well done, Becky. Well done.
It is only a 1-piece repertoire, I must admit, Jean. And I've spent the last 6 weeks practicing solidly, knowing that this was probably going to come up.
I think that was totally fantastic, Becky. And it just, I don't know if anyone else experiences it, but sometimes it hits me how excluded you've been because you just kind of accepted the kind of status quo and just thought, oh, it isn't for me. So I hadn't even thought that there was a possibility that I could have. I just remember my piano lessons and scales as this trauma rather than anything really nice. And then you see something like that actually makes me feel just quite excited and quite touched. That, but also hats off to Rachel, because it's the areas of the world that we don't realise needs opening up to everybody. And it's just fantastic, really fantastic. I think Tony has a question. I don't know if it's for Rachel or for you, but I will spotlight Tony and he can ask his question.
My general point is that I made this and I based that she couldn't do music earlier on in her life because I never started playing piano when I was 6 years old. And I got to grade 2 piano, and then I went on to do music O level, and I was really keen to do music level, but it was not possible because you need to be able to go to grade 6 in an instrument, and I couldn't do that. And I really enjoyed learning all the music theory because it does really help you to appreciate what you're listening to. And so I was just after A-level, I did some competition lessons, but I got involved with a teacher, so I dropped my interest in music, and it's a shame in a way because I know it's lovely to have a good understand, basic understanding of harmony, and then be able to play around with chord structures on the piano. But I found that when I was in the 20s, when I started playing the piano again, I got very bad spasms in my shoulder, so it made piano very difficult to continue with, which is a shame because music is such a good form of expression that if you can get people to play some sort of instrument, it really does help in so many ways. And it has certainly been a great pleasure in my life to appreciate a deeper understanding of music.
Yeah, I think yeah, that's right, Tony. I think the other thing that I really liked about music theory, although I think there's less of it now from talking to my flute teacher, was a component of that when I was younger was about composing. And actually my theory was, well, even if I can't play an instrument, at least I might be able to compose music and write some things and like you say, understand the rules and the harmonies and the things around it.
So how far did you get to with your music theory then? How far did you go with it?
How far did I go? I went to grade 3, which even at the time was quite unusual because a lot of the time they seem to, you know, people are saying, why are you bothering doing a grade 1 music theory exam? Because particularly at that time, the in thing to do was to just make sure you did your grade 5 so that you could continue to do your higher practical grading on your piece of music, which, you know, isn't necessarily what everyone wants to do or can do.
Oh, but you thought, what did you think about going further than grade 3?
I think I was only quite young, so we're talking about 10 or 11 sort of age, and I think that the kind of adults had kind of said, oh, it'll be too boring if we stop the piano. If we stop the piano, it'll be too boring, so we'll just stop the lot.
And that's a shame.
Yeah, yeah, it is a shame. And I think if I was as an adult now, I would say, no, I want to do this. But I think as a child, you don't have quite the same, you know.
Definitely not too late.
You have the enthusiasm and the ability to concentrate on it, which is harder when you're an adult.
Yeah. So yeah, and like Rachel says, it's never too late. And yes, that is something I'm also looking at with my flute teacher, is getting back into more of the music theory sort of thing.
Yeah.
Doing a bit more music theory. So yeah.
Amazing. I think Miriam has a question.
I just wanted to with my physio hat on, and before Rachel's presentation, I was looking at some of the other videos as well. So I recognize some of the videos you showed, but just thinking about not only you know, what you showed us, Rachel, but also Becky, when you were talking about how, you know, blowing a raspberry for a brass instrument didn't work, but knowing that blowing a wind instrument, especially a flute, is not straightforward either. It just made me really think about when you're working with music, you're not only using the level of control that you have within your that part of your brain to control that limb, but you're also opening up, because of the sound, the more creative other side of your brain. So actually, from a potential to learn new skills, it's like an overload of neuronal stimulation. So although, you know, I agree with Tony that it is harder to learn as one gets older, the level of opportunity and development is so there. Everything's harder when you get older, but you know, we can, as human beings, still learn new skills. And I just wanted to share, because I just think it's really exciting.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting. So I use a stand like they were showing you with the clarinets, purely because although I can stand as a hemiplegic, my kind of spasticity and crossover is such that if I was to stand up and try and play the flute, I'd probably fall over. And I certainly wouldn't be able to concentrate on the music enough and keep my balance and do everything that I needed to do. So I sit, I've got a cushion behind me, and it took quite a few lessons to get the setup right and get everything sorted, you know, as far as works. And sometimes even now, like last week, I had a really rubbish flute lesson because I was sat on a different chair and it was at a different height, and I just couldn't get everything right the way I wanted it. And my flute teacher was like, "You're still not happy, are you?" I'm like, "No." But it does have, for me, it has positive psychological benefits. And yes, I've got to learn about blowing and all the rest of it, but it has also does provide an extra kind of physio lesson, in that I have to sit in a particular place, and I have to try and make sure that I balance stuff, and I have to think about some of the breathing techniques and things we've been thinking about. A lot of the time I won't necessarily get, or whatever, and then you have to be careful with this, because some people don't like it and whatever. But a bit like a physio, my flute teacher was like, "Is it all right if I hold on to your chest?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's fine. That's what my neurophysios do with me. That's fine." So I think for some of us, that kind of thing, which some teachers, particularly with who are dealing with children or other things, might struggle with that. With a CP person, that some of those things we're much more used to, and actually that was how I learned, and it's been the best way that I've managed to learn to breathe. Or, you know, she's been saying things like push back against me when you breathe properly, and things like that. So there are different techniques as well for teaching, but quite often the music teachers already know quite a lot of those things. They just perhaps have to think a bit outside the box.
Can I pick up on a few bits? I don't disagree with anything, Becky. I just there might be a few things that are just helpful to highlight from things you've said. So one of the things that we've done with children, it is a common issue with this blowing a raspberry on a brass instrument, and as a cellist, I can't blow a raspberry for any divine loads of time, and there's nothing wrong with my lips. But one of the things that we have been known to do is to use, brass instruments come in a huge range of different sizes, and trumpet and cornets are actually, the mouthpieces are really quite small, and you have to get your lips really tight to be able to make that sound. So one of the things we've done sometimes with children is we've given them a mouthpiece from like the next instrument up, so a tenor horn or something just slightly bigger, and because it's just that tiny amount bigger, it just allows you a bit more wriggle room on your lips. So if you want to play a brass instrument and you've tried the trumpet and can't buzz, try tenor horn, and ignore any brass specialists who say, you know, this isn't the right done thing. Just go with it, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, well, it doesn't, but it's definitely worth trying. I think what you were saying about your teacher, again, is a common thing that we find. the instrument, if you think about it in a scientific fashion, the combination of open and closed holes has to be the same, otherwise the pitch is different. So once the teachers have understood it, actually all the teachers we've worked with have actually really enjoyed something that's close to what they know and love, but just slightly different. It actually makes it interesting. So, you know, I'm not surprised that your teacher after a lesson or two was able just to pick it up. And you know, again, we often get asked for, well, have you got a teacher who can work with this? And it's like, no, just take it to somebody nearby who knows the flute or the clarinet or whatever, because they will get to grips with it very, very quickly. So and then again, they'll know for the next person that comes along as well. In terms of composition, about 3 or 4 years ago, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but there was a Danish composer who has got cerebral palsy who wrote a composition for piano with left-hand piano concerto, and it was I think the world premiere was in Cologne in Germany, but the British premiere was in Birmingham with the CBSO in Symphony Hall. And so he's definitely worth looking up. If you do want to, you know, explore composition, go and see someone else who's had a go and done it, and start writing piano music for one hand alone, because that's what we're short of, particularly right hand alone. And then finally, the point that you mentioned about sitting and playing, again, that's something we find very frequently with children we work with, and we work with adults as well, but we tend to work with the children a bit more intensively, the children with cerebral palsy, and it's something that teachers don't always get. So I've had teachers say, if you know the brass instruments, kind of sit, you can't see me, but sit, you know, you sit with your arm around them and then play them that way, and they go, well, all they've got to do is put their hand and hug the instrument and then play. Well, I know from my son, who hasn't got CP but had a stroke age 2, which kind of is the same thing almost, you know, actually the hand is up here more. The minute he starts concentrating on something else, his hand's up here, and you're more likely to get punched in the face. We call it his right hand hook. So, but you know that from, if that's your experience, you will know that, but the teacher won't always understand that. So just, you know, explaining that to the teacher, I think, is helpful to them if you can bear going through that with them. But it is something that teachers, and it doesn't matter how many times I say, actually the arm is fine, it's the brain communication with the arm that's where the barrier is. It doesn't always register with them. So keep telling them that too.
Talking of which, I have to hold a stress ball in my right arm, otherwise my fingers get too tight when I'm playing. So there you go.
Yeah, that's a good tip.
That's phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. I've learned so much, and we have come to, unfortunately, to 8 o'clock. Jamie has just put his hand up, so if everyone's happy just to go over just slightly, I'm just going to ask Jamie. Hold on, let me find Jamie.
He says it's a quick one.
That's fine. Hi Jamie. Hi Emma. Nice to see you.
Yeah.
If everybody.
Yeah.
It's everybody. It's if everybody. If anybody hold a cup with a string. Strength. What are you doing? What are you seeing? What are you saying? What you're saying? What that woman said?
Yeah.
Let a this woman Rachel said, let a child who's at school, a teacher, hold it to your mouth. It not work. I am saying.
It's
not. Do you want me to try and put that together? Jamie's saying that Rachel said, no, that Jamie can, you can have a drink out of a cup if someone holds a cup to his with a straw, but if everybody, he's saying that when he has a drink, he can have a drink with a cup if the cup's fixed onto the table or onto a stand or something, which he does out of a straw. But if someone holds the cup to him, it's not the same. And and you saying by that same token, what she's saying about having a teacher hold an instrument is not the same as having it in the musician's control. Is that what you're saying? So you're agreeing with everything that they're doing with all the stands and saying it's great, and it's the same principle as how you drink and everything. And Jamie said you've never had played instruments or anything, have you? Even at school, he never had the opportunity to play anything. So
no, often, sadly, that's not an unusual story I hear. And I'd like to say that I don't know how Jamie is, but I'd like to say it's different now. But I'd be lying if I said that. In the majority of cases, there's still so much that teachers and music services don't know. And I suspect there are probably still children up and down the country who probably have a very similar experience to that. I'd entirely agree. Having the instrument exactly where you know where it is and you can take yourself to it is always going to work, and it frustrates the life out of me when I hear teachers, and it's been said to me in the last 6 months, oh, it's fine, the teaching assistant can hold his X instrument, and A, it's not fine, and it's not going to be helpful to the student, and B, it's also not helpful from an independence point of view, because what do you do when you take the instrument home to practice? You don't have the teaching assistant hovering over you. And C, this was said in the depths of COVID, and it was just like, but we're not supposed to be within 2 meters of each other. So from any of those arguments, I'm with Jamie, it shouldn't be. One other person I haven't mentioned, and another way of accessing music making that might be interesting to have a look at, someone else with cerebral palsy having explored, is James Rose. James Rose is I don't know how old he is, 20s, I would think, late 20s probably now. He had a position as conductor in an ensemble called BSO Resound. So as part of Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra, they had a small ensemble made up entirely of disabled musicians, and he has got quadriplegic cerebral palsy and not much control of any of his limbs or his speech, but he conducts by having a conducting baton attached to his glasses. And he conducted even in the Albert Hall in the proms. So another homework task, go and Google James Rose and find out how he works with musicians as well, because that's another avenue that's open for exploring.
Yeah, brilliant.
Thank you so very much, Rachel. We have so much to so many pieces of homework to do and so much to explore. It's been fantastic having you.